Yep.
So, hi everybody, welcome to the Transit Coalition dinner meeting. I do want to mention a little housekeeping thing. We do like to do recycling, so if you have any of these fine cans or bottles, we have a recycling thing there, and we'll have like a little bag to put the cans and bottles in so we can recycle them. Anyways, Transit Coalition is a nonprofit. We have dinner meetings to educate people on various projects. Tonight we're working on the Green Line extension south to somewhere. You'll find out where, with different choices. In addition to that, we have a number of meetings scheduled for this year. Coming up, we have the Director of Construction coming, Rick, and he'll be coming soon. Then we have high-speed rail in the end of February with, all my tonight's the blank night, so the names, head of high-speed rail for Southern California is speaking. Then later we have the CEO of Metro coming. So we have a number of meetings on a number of projects, and hopefully you'll consider joining us when they come. So tonight, we have Meghna Kahana, and Meghna's been at Metro almost enough time to have super seniority. I'm probably the only one that, if I had a badge number, I'd have seniority, but everybody else that I know retired. So Meghna has been involved in, besides this world, she's been in the architectural world, but currently she's the Director of Transit Corridors, is that correct? And so she's going to give you the information about the Green Line extension, and if there's any controversial questions, send them off to me, and I'll take the heat on the controversial ones, but she'll tell you the good stuff. Just as a aside, because she's not going to talk about this, there was in the last couple months with the board a decision to make the Green Line. Originally, when the Green Line was planned, way back when, I guess it was 1995, Green Line was actually supposed to go and connect with something called the North Coast Extension, which is going to go south on Lincoln Boulevard to sort of probably Santa Monica. And that was the original route, and then they had to do this engineering, it's like value engineering, and they cut out the part that goes to LAX and the North Coast Extension. Mercedes, how are you tonight? So they did cut that out, and then they extended the line with 2 car stations and less than necessary, what was appropriate substations at the time. But when they extended it, the 2 car stations on the rail line instead of 3 mean that if there is any changes, I guess we could ask our speaker tonight, or if the board directs the retrofitting, the Green Line could have 3 car stations. But right now, it doesn't have enough power, and apparently when there was some decisions that became political versus operational, the political people wanted the Green Line to go a specific way to the South Bay, and the operations people wanted to make the train work based on the power and how they could run 3 car trains and 2 car trains. And in December, some decisions were made, and the board came to a compromise where they're going to run a set of routes for the next year. It's going to cost about $10 million more to operate it, but there was this political compromise, and that's just what happened. So that's the operational part of the Green Line, and from everybody I talked to at Metro, you shouldn't talk about it because it's a controversial topic. But before we get started with our speaker, I want everybody to introduce themselves to Meghna. So let's start with this jump and roll with the presentation, and Meghna's going to enlighten you on the various aspects of the Green Line extension to the South Bay. So, welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming to learn about the Green Line extension to Florence. And some of you might have seen this presentation. It's a very similar presentation. We just finished the supplemental alternative analysis for this project, where we looked at various alternatives, and I'll walk you through some of those alternatives. And we took that to the board board approved 2 alternatives to be carried forward into the environmental document. Just to give you an overview of the project, it is a light rail extension, so the mode is determined. We will be extending the green line from the existing Redondo Beach Marine Station, which is right here. And the extension is a 4.6-mile extension. It runs through City of Lawndale, City of Redondo Beach, and ultimately terminates at City of Torrance. Both City of Redondo and Torrance, they are planning a transit center, so those would be the 2 stops along this route. We did have a station in Lawndale, but based on the feedback we got during the supplemental alternative analysis phase, we have eliminated that station in Lawndale. So this alignment, it's a 4.6-mile alignment, and it will have 2 stations, one in Redondo and one in Torrance. The project is driven by these goals that are listed here. We do want to improve mobility, minimize environmental impact, support local and regional land use plans, and ensure equity. So as you know, Metro has adopted the equity platform, and we will be working closely as we work along this corridor to ensure equity issues are addressed. So when we were looking at these alternatives as part of the supplemental alternative analysis, we were looking at 4 alternatives. And to categorize these alternatives, there were 2 alternatives that were within the Metro right-of-way. So just so that you know, the 4.6-mile extension primarily runs through Metro right-of-way. It is a right-of-way Metro acquired back in 1990s. There is a freight train that runs infrequently along this corridor, and there's a refinery in Torrance, if you haven't heard about it. It's the famous refinery in Torrance that's located right here, and the freight corridor does have a lot of storage, and it serves the refinery. So 2 alternatives which are shown in this green color are what we were looking at were part of the Metro right-of-way. And then the other 2 alternatives were result of our constant communications with the city, different stakeholders, and City of Lawndale had a lot of concerns with the light rail running through their city. It is primarily a single-family neighborhood. Most of the houses back onto the right-of-way. So they were concerned about light rail running behind residential neighborhoods. So we did look at 2 alternatives which take you to the street. Houghton Boulevard is one of the major commercial streets in Lawndale and Redondo. It is a Caltrans roadway. To connect to the street, we have to get next to the 405 freeway and work with Caltrans as we look at these 2 alternatives. And one of the alternatives did look at doing like a sweeping curve so that we could serve the Redondo Beach Transit Center. The city was making so much investment in the transit center, we didn't want to miss it and stay on the street. But at the same time, South Bay Galleria is looking at their property, and they want to redevelop that property. Right before City of Redondo Beach passed a moratorium on their development, South Bay Galleria was able to get away from that, and they have a mixed-use development that has hotel, residential. So they have been planning that, and we've been working with them to see how, if we look at alternative 3, how can we integrate that station with their development. But that's a decision yet to be made. We haven't even determined which alternative. And then the last stop, which is the Torrance Transit Center. City of Torrance, if you have seen the news, they did a groundbreaking on their transit center last year, and they have been working on developing this site. It has a intermodal bus plaza and some facility, transport facility, to allow people to come in, park their cars, and get on the green line. There are a lot of issues here with the refinery and BNSF, which we will be exploring as part of the environmental. So when we went to a board, based on the supplemental alternative analysis, we recommended carrying forward these 2 alternatives into our EIS, and we will be doing a combined document. The 2 alternatives that we are carrying forward, one alternative alternative is metro right-of-way with an overcrossing at Manhattan and Inglewood, and I'll show you what it would look like in a minute. And alternative 3 is the alternative that takes you to the street, has a stop at South Bay Galleria, and then has a stop at Torrance Transit Center. So these are the 2 alternatives that we are carrying forward into our environmental. Alternative 1, when I say the right-of-way with overcrossing, basically as we depart the Redondo Beach Marine Station, which is an aerial station, we stay in an aerial configuration. At Manhattan and Inglewood, based on Metro's grade separation policy, we will stay in an aerial configuration. And then we start transitioning to add grade, where you see that dashed blue line. And in most of the segment by Lawndale, Redondo, we are primarily at grade. There are existing bridges, freight bridges that cross these streets. The streets are under, especially Artesia. When we build our light rail, we'll be building new light rail bridges to take our trains over those streets. The next stop would be at Redondo and then the Torrance. One thing I do want to mention that typically the right-of-way is 100 feet, but in some segments it goes down to 75 feet. And especially in the segment by Torrance Refinery, which is south of 190th, Metro only has 15 feet. So they're 15. Yes, you heard it right. So we do have to work with BNSF, acquire some right-of-way to build our light rail tracks. This is just a conceptual sketch of how it would look like. And this is the segment, as I mentioned, this is that aerial segment when we transition, right before we transition to add grade. Alternative 3 is the alternative, as I mentioned, this is the alternative taking us to the street. So when we depart the Redondo Beach Marine Station, we stay in an aerial configuration, but we get next to the 405. This will require a lot of coordination with Caltrans. How do we build this light rail structure? We don't own property there, so there'll be some issues that we need to deal with when we get into environmental. And around 164th, we start transitioning to add grade. We will have a station. We were thinking about putting a station at Hawthorne 166th, but that station has been eliminated. As I mentioned, Lawndale, there was not a lot of support for station in the city of Lawndale. We do have to do some additional grade separation analysis to understand how this alignment would be at Redondo Beach and Artesia as part of our environmental work, but right now it's at grade. And our station would be at South Bay Galleria. And then to connect back into our right-of-way at 190th, we do have to do a short aerial segment. Because 190th, the freight corridor actually goes in an aerial configuration at 190th, and the street is under. So to connect in, we just have to do an aerial segment. So those are some of the things we need to consider as we get into environmental. This is just another conceptual sketch of what this alignment would look like in that aerial configuration as it comes from 405 and comes down to Hawthorne Boulevard. Just to give you an analysis of some of the performance measurements, both these alternatives, based on the ridership we did for supplemental alternative analysis, has very similar ridership. The travel time are in the range of 7 to 9 minutes. 9 minutes because it's traveling along the street. It has to stop at some intersections. The cost estimate. So alternative 1 right now is estimated at 893 million. And according to Measure M, for this project we have 891 million. So it is in the range, but alternative 3 is in that range of 1 billion to 1.2 billion. And the reason there's an asterisk there, like I mentioned, we have to do additional grade separation analysis that could increase the cost of the project, so there's that range. Both these alternatives right now are favored by the community, depends on which stakeholder group you're talking to. As part of our supplemental alternative, we did extensive outreach. We did a lot of stakeholder meeting. We took people out on tours of the Gold Line, Expo Line, so they could get an idea of what a light rail system looks like. You'll be surprised a lot of people in that community are not aware of what light rail corridors look like. And they envision a freight train running every 5 minutes down the corridor. So it's a lot of education, and I think it needs to continue. People have been opposed to this project for a long time in that some areas along the corridor. So that work needs to continue into our environmental. And just to give you an idea, we do want to start our environmental, advanced conceptual engineering and outreach by fall of 2019. We want to finish the final EIR sometime in fall of 2021 to winter of 2022. The design and construction, right now, according to Measure M, this project is scheduled to open in 2030 to 33. But this project is on that list of 28 by 28 with an anticipated, actually I should use that word, anticipated opening of 27. So there is a lot of interest in accelerating this project, but again, the February board meeting will be very interesting. You should all listen to that. Our CEO will be presenting the 28 funding plan. So, so for the EIR and the advanced conceptual engineering, we do anticipate to release the RFP by early March. And we are planning to include preliminary engineering as an option to that environmental and advanced conceptual engineering task to expedite the project and meet that 27 deadline. If we go down that path, we need to figure out ways to deliver this project faster, cut down on some of the procurement timelines. So with that, I think that's pretty much all I have, and I can answer any questions. Yes.
Hi, have you decided or spoken to the board about a procurement methodology? Are you thinking of P3?
So I have to say, I'm also working on West San Ana branch. That's one project we are looking at P3.
Right.
And for this particular project, we haven't received any interest on P3. But having said that, I don't want to say that there is no interest. There could be interest, it's just that right now we haven't received anything on this project. But there's a funding plan in works, and maybe there could be opportunities for P3. It's just that sometimes P3 developers, they do like operating an independent line which doesn't interline with an existing metro system for efficiencies and other factors. With this line, we are extending an existing metro system. So, just a consideration.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's risks, and there's other projects that have done a similar P3 procurement, adding on to an existing line, so just curious.
Yeah, and I have to say, like you saw for alternative 1 and 3, it's the cost estimate. We do, like if we go with alternative 1, I'm not even suggesting that's the route we're going to go with. But we are very close in terms of what we have, the available funds. It's just the delivery method that we have to get creative.
Okay.
I'm very curious. Option 1 has the existing Redondo Beach station on it. And that's completely designed and it's intermodal and has plenty of space for a parking facility. Option 2, on Hawthorne, I think I heard you say you're relying on a developer property to build a new station?
We're not relying on the developer property. The station will be still in the middle of the street. It's just working with the developer to figure out ways how we can connect better into their development.
If I'm not mistaken, that's the existing mall that's there already. And that existing mall has the existing transit station that is being expected to be moved to the new transit station.
Correct.
From
Yeah.
Redondo.
Yes.
But there isn't much space in that street for that new station.
Again,
From my memory, I just mean, it's early yet, but
So Hawthorne Boulevard is a wide street, and if I can go back and you can look at cross sections, there is room in the median to accommodate for a station. But having said that, there needs to be evaluation of what it would do to the travel lanes or the sidewalk, and that's something we'll be looking at when we get into the next phase.
so they're literally only a few blocks away.
Yeah. Mhm.
So you're gonna go with one in a more expensive, so one of the options is a more expensive, I'm just wondering what the driver is.
So like I mentioned, when we started looking at alternative one, there were a lot of resistance from Lawndale of having a line run through the backyard of their residential area. So at that point, we worked with the stakeholder groups and different city staff and even the elected. And alternative 3 was one of the alternatives that came out of those discussions. And also, it does give you opportunity to have a light rail run through a commercial corridor connecting to South Bay Galleria. Yes, at the same time, we do miss the Redondo Beach Transit Center. But maybe if there's a station at South Bay Galleria, could we run buses in between? So those are the things that we have to work through in our environmental plan.
Did I understand correctly that you said you may issue 2 RFPs, one specific to the CEQA NEPA document and then one specific to preliminary engineering?
It'll be just one RFP. So one RFP with the environmental advanced conceptual engineering as the base and the preliminary engineering as the option. So it'll be just one RFP.
Given that this project has been added to the 28 by 28, does that have an impact on the selection of the alternative?
Not really. I think we still would have to do that environmental process, community engagement, the design, and I think the board will ultimately select a locally preferred alternative. I think even right now, as I'm working and managing the West San Ellen Branch project, yes, it is one of the projects for P3, but that's not preventing us from working with the communities, addressing all those issues, or going down a path where the community is not, we don't have a buy-in from the community.
Well, of course you have, but you're required.
I was curious, other than Lawndale, have you experienced any other active groups opposing the project, or is there any other areas that could be threatening to the project as far as, like Torrance sometimes has very vocal community groups?
I would say we do have to work with citizens of Lawndale. There is a group that's called Right of Say. They have play on the right of way to right of say. That's a very active group in Lawndale that's opposing the project. So we do need to work with them. There are some residents in Redondo Beach too. If it runs along the right of way, they're concerned about noise. They're concerned about the at-grade crossings. So those are the two groups that we need to work with. In Torrance, as of today, we've seen a lot of support from City of Torrance. But if you go down the street along Hawthorne, there is a portion of residential that is by South Bay Galleria, which is in City of Torrance, so there could be issues that might come up. And another issue that I think we need to look at is negotiating with BNSF to get the right of way, and being next to the refinery, having a light rail.
Is there an opportunity to just have them vacate that and sort of, like at Crenshaw, originally it was going to be shared, and then they were able to negotiate a contract to have them out of there. So is it going to be a shared right of way, or are they going to?
So our intent is to keep their operations. The freight tracks, we will relocate the freight tracks and build our light rail tracks next to it. And down by the refinery or in the Torrance area, they do have a lot of spur and storage tracks, so we do want to maintain their operations.
Forgive me, I'm relatively new to the area, this whole refinery question. Could that potentially have a big handicap on the project?
I have to say, right now we've been working with the city, we've been working with some of the stakeholder groups. We haven't heard any concerns, but having said that, when we get into environmental and we start looking at noise, vibrations, or any sort of issues, that's when I think we just have to continue working with the group.
In prior outreach done for similar types of projects, have there been any specific elements that have been above or that have been very successful or successful that you'd want to see integrated into potential future outreach within this project?
I would say, and I'll just speak specifically for this project because every project comes up with new innovative idea. The community tours were very helpful. We could only take a certain group of people out, but it was good for them to look at stuff, experience it, even getting on the train to see how fast it runs or how destructive it is when it's stopping, or the landscaping and the sound barriers. I think the tours were very effective, and also we conducted some leadership workshops where all these city staff and the managers were brought into the same room, and it was led by Supervisor Janice Hahn. So that was a very effective tool for this project.
Was any options looked at as far as underground? I know it's much more expensive, but there's, Crenshaw was going to be at grade for most of it, and then finding the community gets everyone to go underground, so I was curious if there's any push on that. And
Of course. So alternative 2, which ran along the right of way, instead of doing an overcrossing, we were looking at an undercrossing in that segment. And that's something that meets our metro grade separation policy. We can do the over or undercrossing, and we thought that would help a city understand their position and meet them halfway. There's still a lot of pressure, and if you were at the board meeting when we presented these options, City of Lawndale really came out strong. A lot of support from them on undergrounding this alignment through the City of Lawndale and the segments along Redondo Beach. But yes, it's again project cost, time, budget.
So I have a question about first last mile access to the extension. And one of the modes that many people use are the bicycle. And there are other ways coming online in different communities. And for the Expo line, the orange line, there are parallel bike paths. The Expo line suffered greatly in that effort because the planning for the bike path was done separately, different funding at different times from the Expo line itself. And there's a lot of bicycling in beach cities, South Bay cities, Redwood and Torrance. There are nice bike lanes on Hawthorne Boulevard and City of Hawthorne. Unfortunately, once it gets to Lawndale, Lawndale has refused to support that. But other than Lawndale, communities are pretty supportive. Is there any discussion of making access to and from the Green Line by bicycle easier as you build this?
Sure. So I'm going to come back to these cross sections, but just to address your question, as you know, our board has adopted the first last mile policy, which calls for all the projects moving forward into, even in the environmental phase and the design phase, we need to look at first last mile access for our station area and the corridors. So as the project advances, even in our scope that we are going to release, there will be a component of the first last mile. So we do want to go out into the communities and do our walk audits, create this priority network. So our first last mile team will be working alongside us during the environmental and design to identify these first last mile connections. And they will become part of the project cost according to the policy. And the cities can use their 3% contribution towards these first last mile. So just that's the framework. So as we work on this project, we will be looking at first class line. And just to mention one thing, as we were developing alternatives within the right-of-way, because it's a 100-foot right-of-way, we were looking at opportunities of putting a multi-use path or a bike lane alongside the light rail corridor where we could accommodate it. There is a segment, like I said, the right-of-way gets very narrow. But for the alternative that stayed within the metro right-of-way, we were looking at putting in a bike lane or a multi-use path alongside the light rail system. But as we get into the next phase, the first last mile plan is going to happen for both the alternatives, and we'll explore working with groups like yourself and the cities to identify this first last mile. Yes.
With the rise of Uber and Lyft, my understanding is ridership has dropped. Have those projections been updated to reflect that?
So we do have a ridership model, as you know. It's very, not a micro level, but it's a macro level. But at the same time, there has been discussions about the micro transit project. So as we work on this project or any other project, we'll keep working with a micro transit group to understand how the circulation around the station areas need to work. I don't have an answer for you today, but that's something we are considering because
Well, it's
that.
very dynamic, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, you mentioned the Santa Ana line that's being designed now. How would you compare the community support of the Santa Ana line compared to the community support that you just talked about?
So for West Santa Ana branch, as you know, it runs through various communities. We are working with various cities, stakeholder groups to build that consensus, and also in the downtown area. In the south, primarily, there's just that one alignment. But in the north, in the downtown area, there are two alternatives. One alternative connects into Union Station, the other alternative connects into at 7th and Metro. So we have been working with various stakeholder groups, continuing to do community workshops, engagement, to get feedback and hopefully come to that consensus by the time we go to the board to select the locally preferred alternative. I can anticipate this question.
She knows the question, but the rest of the room doesn't. At one point in time, historically, the Green Line was actually supposed to go to LAX and not to the South Bay. That was the original design. And at that time, the planners for Metro in 1990, 93 found out that there was just a shortfall of money. They couldn't make all the money reach. And at that point in time, there was a lot of defense industry things going to the South Bay. So they decided they would reroute the Green Line south to the South Bay, which is part of this extension. But when that was done, they used something called value engineering, which instead of doing 3-car stations and having adequate substations, they didn't anticipate that part of the line would have a great ridership. So they designed it with less than adequate substations and 2-car platforms instead of 3. So now recently, I'm trying to word this carefully to keep the politics out of this, but the folks from, well, I know, well, it's not secret, but anyways, the folks from the South Bay COG and the people that represent the South Bay decided that the Metro staff decided they would operate the rail lines based upon the available power, which meant 3-car trains could run on one corridor, 2-car trains would run on the other corridor. But politically, the board in the last month came out with this concept that they had their own idea of how to run the trains versus the way the trains were wanted to be run by Metro's operational staff. So then that brings us up to the following. with these kinds of issues, and within your project, or if there has to be a board modification to what you're doing, is your design allowing for 3-car platforms in the part that you are doing now, the 4.7-mile extension? And what about the gap, the 3 or 4 station gap? Is it part of your project to bring it up to adequate substations and length of the platforms? That's a very long way to ask a simple question, but I think the people in the room need to understand there are politics involved. It's Metro, there's always politics. So, and staff just has to do what the marching orders are. And anyways, there's the question.
So I will get to the point that for the Green Line extension, for the 4.6-mile extension, the 2 stations that we will be adding, we will be putting in 3-car platforms. So we are designing our stations to be 3-car platforms. So the extension will have 3-car platforms. For the gap, which is on the Green Line, the existing stations which are 2-car platform, that's something that we need to work with our operations group to identify what that project would be. It's not part of this project scope. If that answers your question.
Well, part. The other part is then, would the board have to act to find some fund, if you had to, I don't know whether you have to define what the issue are and then bring it back to the board, and then the board has to set up a budget and do whatever they have to do for environmental. Is that what has to happen if they want to take the gap and bring it up to 3-car and substation adequate power?
I would say I don't have an answer for you as to what the board would like to see.
Well, I don't know what they want either. I'm just asking
Yeah.
if there's steps that staff has been instructed to do, or does the board have to ask staff to come through with a proposal?
So I can just say that for the extension, we will be designing it to accommodate for 3-car platforms. For the gap, that's something that would be a separate project, and our operations group is going to work on that. And maybe it would be good if someone from operations, if you contact them, they can give you a better answer as to how we'll be addressing that.
Okay. Do we have more questions?
I think I answered it all, Jay.
Very thorough, very thorough.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Magna. We can, if anybody wants to stick around, we can talk about any other, we can answer questions and talk about other projects. As you know, Metro has a whole lot of things going on with the 20 by 20 plan and all these different projects. And I should ask the room here, does anybody have any interest in seeing a meeting on the Purple Line extension? Raise your hand if you want to see anything on the Purple Line. Okay, there's interest there. How about the extension of the rail line past Union Station to the yards? Any interest in that? I'll be part of the Purple Line. Any other projects that you'd like us to cover? Any interest on anything specifically? I will remind you that we've got the high-speed rail coming in February, and Richard Clark is coming in early February. So those are, and later on, we've got the Metro CEO coming in March or April. So you're free to hang around. There's still food left, so grab food if you'd like.